In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a round tip Elizabethan style pleated hat. We're going to be using a felt tip, wool fabric, and a 2-ply buckram brim. Let's get started. Materials you will need of your 16th century hat: cutting implements, a small measuring device, a tape measure, millinery needles. Many Joanns sell these, but you can also order them online. Chalk. I use just plain old blackboard chalk. A marker of some type. Some pins. Fabric. I'm going to be using a lightweight wool flannel and a lining fabric, and I'm going to be using a silk taffeta. A head plate, which in the comment section is a PDF that you can print out and cut out your own head plate size. 2-ply buckram. You can order this online, or you can simply take 2 pieces of 1-ply buckram and iron them together. And a piece of cardstock on which to make your pattern. If you plan to make more than one hat, it's helpful to have an actual pattern. When measuring your head plate, make sure you've done your hair in the way that you plan to wear it under the hat. If you're planning on a coif, make sure you put the coif on, because this will add dimension to your head plate. Your head will be bigger around if you have your hair up in braids, or if you have a coif on, or any of those things. Around your head, and this is a 22-inch head plate. And see how we're flat all the way around? We're not going at some funky angle. Most period hats were worn flat on the head. I printed out the head plate, and now I'm going to create a pattern for my brim. This is just a piece of heavyweight cardstock. You could use a file folder. And I'm going to mark around this. Mark the points northeast, south, and west on your head plate, and that's just simply so that you can keep it straight as you're working with it. This is the head plate I've measured. When you put your hat together, there will be fabric and materials that will fill up about a 1/2 inch all the way around your head plate. So in order for your hat to fit, we actually need to add an additional 1/2 inch all the way around. Most period hats have between a 1.5 to 2-inch brim. So I am going to make my brim be 1.5 inches. So from the second line I added, I'm going to measure out 1.5 inches. And remember, we marked our front, back, and sides. I'm going to remark those, because your head plate is an oval. It is not a round. And it's important that you keep your brim straight as you're working on it. This would be for a round brim. Let's say I wanted to add a point to my brim, as one sees in a lot of portraiture. From the edge of the brim to where your point is. We cut this out. And see how we're just cutting that straight right there? There's no dip or anything like that. I now have my pattern. And I'm going to go ahead and cut the head plate. And now we have our brim pattern. I'm now ready to put my hat pattern on my piece of 2-ply buckram. And I'm just going to draw that on. And I still need to re-add my 1/2 inch, which will end up being the tabs that get stood up. At this time, I am not going to cut the head plate out, and I'll show you in just a minute why. I'm going to cut my pattern along the edges, and I'm going to leave about 1/4 inch because I'm going to be folding those inside and whip stitching them to have a finished edge. I now have my 2 pieces, one for the top and one for the bottom. I'm going to start with one piece. Do you see these black lines? We're going to need those lines when it comes time to finish our hat. They're all on the inside. An easy way that I have found to mark those is to simply do a machine stitch along those lines, and they will not show when your hat is finished. But it's a nice way to secure your wool as you're working. And you're actually going to do it on both sides, but we're going to start with the side where I can see that. Now, I'm ready to turn my brim fabric in for my 1/4 inch, and we're going to do our whip stitch along the edge. You might find it easiest to start in the center back. I'm going to take my bottom section. I'm going to pull that nice and snug. That's the other reason to do the machine stitch, is you can keep this nice and snug. I'm going to take top section, fold it under. I like to hide my knot underneath my first stitch. And then I'm just going to pick up just a little bit of wool. If I'm doing silk, same way. See how I'm doing a nice tight stitch there? This process can be used on round-tipped hats or flat-tipped hats. Either way, there's plenty of documentation for pleated hats using both of these bottom forms. I'm going to mark the center top of my tip with just a little dot of chalk. Then I'm going to measure its side. It's 8 3/4, and I'm going to add a 1/2 inch for seam allowance, so I'll want 9 1/4. I'm going to take my compass here, measure my 9 1/4. I could also use a simple ruler. Mark my center. And I have my circle. I'm going to take a long ruler through my center dot, making an X, and then I'm just going to continue making X's through my center dot until I have lines that are approximately a 1/2 inch apart. I'm going to begin stitching with my knot on the side that does not have the lines, so on the outside. Then I'm going to simply do a running stitch with every other line around my top circle and my bottom circle. Now we're ready to put the fabric over the top of our tip. I like to take a pin, mark the center so that I can find the center of my tip, And that gives me a secure place to work from. Now, remember we marked our 4 corners, or our 4 points? I'm going to go ahead and pin those to the tip. And now I'm ready to pull my pleats. Going to tie those. Going to pleat my fabric within each quadrant all the way around so they're nice and straight. As I feel I've dressed my pleats, I'm going to go back and add some pins just every so often. If you would like to add a pin between each pleat, you certainly can. You're going to figure out what works best for you. But our next step is we're going to turn this over and we're going to sew our pleats down. And you see how we're going to lay those over just a little bit, very, very tiny pleats, laying down, and we're going to stab stitch through the felt. We're ready to attach the tip to the brim. I'm going to cut out the head plate section. And I'm going to cut my extra bit here. Do it quarterly. And then stand our little tabs up. And we're ready to attach the tip to the brim. To cut out my lining, I'm again going to mark a center dot, make my circle, on the lining I'm only going to add 8 lines. Six lines. After I cut this out, I'm then going to use a sewing machine and make darts on each of my line. You can finish your hat with a simple piece of Peter sham or a decorative beaded hat band. Add a feather and a brooch.